He claimed his phone was stolen. The police traced it to our friend's house. Hi everyone. If someone had told me 3 months ago that my perfect life was a lie, I would have laughed. I'm 35, my husband is 36, and for 10 years, we built what everyone thought was a dream life, a quiet home and 2 incredible boys, ages 7 and 5. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect family. But over the last 90 days, my world completely shattered. What started as subtle red flags turned into a nightmare that made me realize the man I shared a bed with for a decade was a total stranger, and someone far more dangerous than I ever could have imagined. It all started about 3 months ago. My husband works long hours in an office, and usually, his texts during the day are pretty ordinary. Things like, "Hey, what's for dinner?" or "Can you pick up milk on the way home?" But one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from him that made my heart stop. It was a cold, bitter, and downright cruel text. He told me I was lazy. He said I was a terrible mother to our boys, and that looking back, he deeply regretted ever marrying me. I sat there staring at the screen, entirely paralyzed. It was completely out of nowhere. There had been no argument that morning. No tension over breakfast. He had kissed me goodbye on his way out the door just like he always did. I convinced myself that maybe he was just having a terrible, stressful day at work and took it out on the wrong person. I decided not to reply and just wait for him to come home so we could talk it out calmly. But when he came home that evening, something far stranger happened. He walked through the front door with a warm smile on his face. He wrapped his arms around me, gave me a kiss, asked what we were having for dinner, and immediately went into the living room to roll around on the carpet and play with the kids. He acted completely normal. It was as if that horrific message had never been sent. I thought maybe he was embarrassed about his outburst and was trying to sweep it under the rug. So, I let it slide that first night. But then, the messages didn't stop. They kept coming. Sometimes he'd send them in the middle of the workday. Other times, late at night when he had to work overtime. And with every passing week, the tone grew darker and more vicious. The texts called me useless. They said I was fortunate he hadn't walked out on me yet, and that no other man would ever want to be with someone like me. Reading those words, over and over, slowly began to break down my self-esteem. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront him directly. When he got home, I pulled him aside, away from the kids, and demanded an explanation. But instead of getting defensive or angry, he just looked confused. Genuinely, deeply confused. He shook his head and said, "What messages are you talking about? You must be misunderstanding something." Frustrated and hurt, I unlocked my phone and held it right in front of his face. I showed him the exact text thread with his name and number right at the top. He just stood there, staring blankly at the screen. Then, he claimed he had lost his phone days ago and had no idea how those texts were sent. But that made no sense at all. He had a replacement phone, and he was still calling and texting me from the exact same phone number. I know how ridiculous this sounds, but as I watched him, he didn't look guilty. He didn't look like a liar caught in a trap. He looked unsettled, almost terrified. At first, I believed he was playing calculated psychological mind games with me. But the way he was acting made no sense. People who manipulate you usually display anger, guilt, or defensiveness in person. But face to face, he was still the same loving, quiet husband he had always been. It felt like I was dealing with 2 completely different human beings inhabiting the same body. Over the next 2 agonizing months, this bizarre reality became my daily life. The toxic messages didn't slow down, if anything, they became more frequent and unpredictable. Day after day, I was forced to live in 2 completely parallel worlds. During the day, my phone would buzz with vile, cruel texts that eroded my spirit and kept my nerves on edge. But by evening, the very same man would walk through the door with a smile, speak to me with tenderness, and play with our sons as if nothing was wrong. I was living in a constant state of hypervigilance, unable to sleep, eat, or focus, wondering every single minute which version of my husband I was actually dealing with. Finally, after 8 straight weeks of this psychological torment, I reached my absolute breaking point. I couldn't keep living in this constant state of fear, anxiety, and confusion. So, I confronted him again. This time, I didn't just show him one single text. I unlocked my phone, opened our message history, and showed him a massive, horrifying log of all the cruel things he had sent me over the past few months. I looked him dead in the eye and told him through tears that I couldn't do this anymore. I said, "If you hate me this much, if you truly despise the life we built together, then have the courage to say it to my face instead of hiding behind a screen." He looked at the screen, then looked back at me, and kept insisting that he had nothing to do with it. He kept swearing on his life that he didn't send those texts, suggesting that someone out there was deliberately playing a sick prank to destroy our marriage. At that point, I was completely done. I couldn't take the denials anymore. My heart was breaking, but I had to protect my sanity and my children. I packed our bags, put our two boys into the car, and drove straight to my parents' house, which is in the same state. My parents were absolute angels. They welcomed us with open arms, provided a safe shelter, and gave me the emotional support I so desperately needed. In that moment, surrounded by my family, I felt profoundly grateful, even as my personal life was falling apart. However, leaving the house didn't bring the peace I was hoping for. Even after moving away, the messages kept coming. Same phone number. Same bitter, resentful tone. The texts began addressing my departure directly. Running away to your mother's house just proves everything I've been saying about you. You are completely pathetic. You can run all you want, but you'll come crawling back eventually. Every single time a new text arrived, I took a screenshot and sent it right back to his number, asking him how he could possibly keep lying. And every single time, he gave me the exact same story. He swore he had lost his physical phone at work weeks ago and had to get a replacement device from the store. He claimed that because he kept his original phone number on the new phone, whoever found or stole his old device must still have access to his messages and was using it to torment me. Whenever we met in person, he would willingly hand over his new phone to let me inspect it. When I checked his sent messages, there was no record of any of those cruel texts. At first, I assumed he was just being clever, sending the vile messages and immediately deleting them from his side so I wouldn't catch him red-handed. The whole story about a lost phone sounded like a convenient, desperate cover-up. Last week, despite all the turmoil, I agreed to let the kids spend a couple of weeks with him. At the end of the day, he is still their father, he has always been loving toward them, and the boys missed him terribly. During this time apart, he hasn't stopped denying everything. He keeps insisting he is innocent, begging me to believe that a stranger is behind the old phone. Meanwhile, like clockwork, the vicious texts keep arriving on my screen day after day. At this point, I don't even know what to believe anymore. I feel like I am slowly losing my mind. On one hand, he could be an incredible actor, a man lying directly to my face without shedding a tear or breaking eye contact. On the other hand, if he is telling the truth, something genuinely bizarre and terrifying is happening behind the scenes. Before all of this started, we had what I truly believed was a perfect, loving relationship. Now, I am terrified that I might be tearing my family apart over a huge misunderstanding, yet some of the messages he allegedly sent were so utterly horrifying that I can't even repeat them here. Over the next 48 hours, I barely slept. I began researching everything I could about mobile networks, apps, and digital tracking, while reading through hundreds of suggestions online. That's when a critical detail finally clicked. We didn't communicate through standard cellular text messages. We used a popular internet messaging app, WhatsApp. After looking deeply into how the app works, I discovered something that completely shifted my perspective. WhatsApp allows a single user account to be linked across multiple secondary devices simultaneously, like tablets, laptops, or extra smartphones. This meant that if my husband had indeed lost his previous physical phone at work weeks ago, anyone who picked it up could potentially still have full access to his messaging account without him even realizing it. The possibility that a total stranger was behind this nightmare suddenly felt very real. However, overnight, the situation dramatically deteriorated. The messages didn't slow down, they grew far worse. They stopped being just bitter insults and morphed into deeply intimidating warnings. The texts began detailing how I would deeply regret walking away and contained terrifying statements that chilled me to the bone. Sitting alone in the dark, watching those words flash across my phone screen, I was paralyzed with fear. By 3 a.m, unable to take the psychological weight any longer, I did something many people advised me against. I typed out a direct response to the number. I wrote, "If these disturbing messages do not stop immediately, I am taking all of these screenshots straight to the police station." I knew it was a risky move, but I couldn't just sit there feeling helpless. Whether it was my husband trying to break my spirit or a malicious stranger taking pleasure in destroying our family, I needed whoever was on the other end to know that I was ready to take legal action. It's easy for people on the outside to judge my decisions. It's easy for onlookers to say, just cut him off, block him, and move on. But this isn't a movie plot where you can just edit out the last 10 years with a single cut. This is a man I loved unconditionally, a life we built brick by brick, and the father of my 2 young children. You don't just erase a decade of your life overnight over a mystery you don't fully understand yet. Unfortunately, my message didn't intimidate the sender. Instead, it triggered an even more aggressive wave of messages. At that point, a wave of cold certainty washed over me. I couldn't take any more risks, especially with my kids staying under his roof. I decided to keep my word. The very next morning, I drove straight to the local police department. Earlier, I had learned that through our family mobile service plan, along with specific device information I managed to get from my husband, network providers and authorities could potentially trace the exact location and network data of the active device linked to the account. The most horrifying realization through all of this was that every time I texted my husband about our children, asking how they were doing or sharing updates, those messages were going directly to the screen of whoever was tormenting me. The thought that our daily routines and the whereabouts of my children were visible to a dangerous, hostile entity made my stomach turn. Getting answers was no longer just about saving my marriage, it was urgently about protecting my boys. When the officer handed me the slip of paper with the traced location, I didn't just look at the address, I knew it instantly. It was a townhouse just 10 minutes away, belonging to one of his female colleagues. A woman who had sat at my dinner table during company gatherings and smiled in my face. My blood turned to ice, and a wave of pure, unfiltered fury washed over me. I wasn't going to sit around and play the victim anymore. I drove straight back to our house, where my husband was staying with our sons. My mother came with me, ready for whatever was about to go down. The second I walked through the door, I took my husband by the arm, dragged him into the kitchen, and demanded the truth. When I dropped her name and showed him the police report with her exact address, his face completely drained of color. He started stuttering, making up pathetic excuses about how she must have stolen his lost phone at work. But I was done taking his nonsense. I cornered him, raising my voice until he couldn't dodge the questions anymore. Finally, under pressure, he cracked. He confessed that they had been having a secret affair behind my back for over a year. I was devastated, but I didn't have time for tears, I wanted total closure. I looked at my mom, who immediately took our 2 boys out to get ice cream so they wouldn't witness the fallout. Then, I grabbed my husband by his shirt collar, dragged him out to the car, pushed him into the passenger seat, and drove straight to his mistress's house. He was begging me to calm down the entire drive, but I ignored every word. When we pulled up to her driveway, I marched right up to the front door and pounded on it until she opened. The look of absolute terror on her face when she saw me standing there, with my husband cowering behind me, was unforgettable. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my phone, dialed his number right in front of her, and watched her living room table light up. His old, missing phone was sitting right there, logged into his WhatsApp, displaying the exact threat of vile, cruel messages she had been sending me for months. I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You thought you were being clever using his account to destroy my life? Look at him. He threw you under the bus the second I pressed him." She tried to scream back at him, claiming he gave her the phone and promised he was leaving me anyway. Standing on her porch, watching the 2 of them instantly turn on each other, screaming, blaming one another, and exposing all their toxic secrets in broad daylight was the most pathetic, satisfying sight I had ever witnessed. I turned around, walked back to my car, left them both standing in the middle of the street arguing, and drove away without looking back once. Apologies, excuses, or marriage counseling were completely out of the question. My trust in him had burned to ashes. But simply walking away and crying into a pillow after 3 agonizing months of psychological torture? Absolutely not. They had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, and they deserved a bitter dose of their own medicine. Because his old phone with WhatsApp was still active and my husband had completely panicked and forgotten to change his account passwords, I realized I still had full access to their secret chat logs and shared files. So, I decided to use their own weapon against them. First, I downloaded the entire backup history, their confidential messages, private photos, and every single screenshot where they laughed about manipulating me. I packaged it all up and sent it directly to the head of human resources at their corporate headquarters. Their company enforces a zero-tolerance policy on workplace affairs, conflict of interest, and using company-issued devices for harassment. The consequences were swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, an internal investigation was launched, and both of them were terminated on the spot without severance pay. Second, I handed every piece of evidence regarding the digital threats, identity impersonation, and harassment straight to my legal team. The authorities opened an investigation into cyberbullying and unauthorized device access. To avoid a drawn-out court battle that could leave his ex-mistress facing serious legal charges, my husband signed away his rights to our shared marital assets and accepted all of my terms regarding child support without a single argument. The absolute icing on the cake, however, was my final move. Using that same linked WhatsApp account, I typed out one last message directly to her line. "He is already doing to you exactly what he did to me. Good luck." Then, I disconnected the device and blocked them both everywhere. Now, the 2 of them are left with no jobs, destroyed professional reputations, facing potential legal trouble, and completely consumed by paranoia, blaming each other for their own downfall. Meanwhile, my boys and I are safe, surrounded by my loving family, and finally stepping into a bright, peaceful new chapter of our lives. This is my final update. Thank you all so much for your support, and remember, always trust your instincts. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you more fascinating stories like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.